Welcome back, everyone. Sorry not to get here sooner with the sign-in sheet. I'll try to mention that again at the end of the class. Just came from an all-day meeting that I had to duck out early from. All right. So today we're going to continue our unit on like the pre-application stages of considering PhD programs. And we're going to be talking about what is often a challenging topic of figuring out what you might like to spend 5 or 6 years of your life doing research on, and maybe relatedly, what you could do with a PhD. And I'm covering that here because, well, whether to pursue a PhD or in what area definitely depends on your ultimate career goals. So we had our first class a week ago, and we talked a little bit about why I'm offering this course. I got to hear from you about why you're taking this course. And we talked about the overall organization of the course and the work that's involved in it, and kind of dovetails with the whole application process. And then we talked about, in general terms, like, what's involved in being a PhD student and the different activities and the balance among them, heavy on research. And we talked about that there isn't necessarily one answer to that question, that, the balance of different activities will depend on everything from the area of biology you're in to your individual interests and funding situation. And we talk a little bit more broadly about funding. And then we also talked about the general difference in approach between being an undergraduate student in terms of coursework as an undergrad and being a PhD student, where coursework is decreasingly important, and more and more depends on the directions that you map out for yourself. Any follow-up questions on what we covered last time? I just realized I didn't do my little share screen for my recording, so I'm going to take care of that here. Should not be a big deal. Okay. All right. And so today, we're going to lead off with this topic of what might you want to study in grad school. And I know that at least a handful of you already have pretty clear ideas about what you want to study in grad school, but that is often a really challenging thing from where you are right now. And also, sometimes it changes. My overall guidance, which I think I mentioned last time, is to try to identify at least a subfield of greatest interests. A subfield might sometimes be kind of the interface between two biological disciplines. So, like I mentioned that, I chair the admissions committee for our genetics PhD program. And so when students are applying to that program, I don't just want to hear them say, I'm really interested in genetics, because we have, 80 something different faculty affiliated with genetics, and they're going to have to zero in a little bit, even if they're doing rotations in 3 different labs. So I want to hear which area of genetics they're interested in, like my area, evolutionary genetics. So that way, instead of trying to choose amongst, 85 different labs, at least they're potentially narrowing things down a bit to the fraction of those labs that are primarily focused on that part of genetics. So, this is just kind of an example of how much I would recommend resolving your interest before you even apply for PhD programs. So, unfortunately, that could be challenging. from where you're at right now. Because at least from coursework alone, as an undergraduate, that's not really designed to get you a lot of exposure to where modern research is at, in a particular area, at least not usually. And so, it's not usually enough to really give you a clear sense of what your options might be. And so this is often a challenge. It was for me, even though I only just kind of managed to go on from my undergrad to grad school to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. Actually, probably if I was applying today with the application that I had back then, I would not get in anywhere. I'll tell you later why that is. It is a challenge. I remember, and I realize, it's a challenge to figure out what you might want to do. So I try to come up with, a list of ways to help that process along, if it's something that you're still working through. One thing I would recommend is just actually read scientific articles. And that will be a challenge, and there will be things you don't understand, and that's normal, and that's okay. But you can look both at the really high profile stuff like Science and Nature, and also fairly like biology journals that are meant for fairly broad readerships and cover a broad swath of biology. So that's why I mentioned PLOS Biology and Current Biology. But you could also definitely look at journals that reflect your specific interests. I didn't care to mention any because you all have different interests. But that might be perhaps the most helpful thing in figuring out what are people doing right now in a given field. And it'll feel like there's a lot of jargon. It'll feel like maybe you don't have the background knowledge they're assuming. But actually, just a really important skill for any scientist is being able to extract what you need out of scientific articles without understanding the whole thing. Because I'm still in that situation. We're always trying to get things out of papers that are from areas outside our own expertise, but that are relevant to a particular thing we're working on. So, it's good to pick up practice in that regard. Another way, as opposed to like browsing tables of contents, which is what I was getting at up here from recent issues of different journals, you could also try to do more of a targeted search, and there are all different ways out there, like PubMed or Google Scholar, to look for articles that may be of interest. And, given that you're interested in doing research that might begin in 1 year or 3 years or whatever, you might want to focus on what people are doing right now. So, in many of these tools, you can filter for articles matching your, keywords of interest that have come out in whatever time frame you prefer. And another thing you could consider doing, and that might be especially helpful really, is to add the word review to these searches. It might really help in particular to browse through recent review articles in your areas of potential interest. So, rather than studies reporting novel findings, these of course are articles that kind of summarize a little area of research. And often they also contain like forward-looking outlooks, like here's what we still don't understand, here's some directions that might be especially useful going forward. So this could be a good way both to kind of build up your understanding in a particular area and to consider what within that area might particularly interest you to potentially research in the future. I also really highly recommend, and this kind of goes along with other things that we'll be doing in this class. I recommend looking at the web pages of faculty and their labs. Usually faculty have a lab web page, not always. I think it's nice if they do. It makes it a lot easier to to kind of get a sense of what they're doing. And it means that they're actually often, giving some exposure to people in their labs. There's usually like a page that shows who's in their lab. So, just looking at research summaries for, the sorts of faculty you might like to work with can be really enlightening as far as what you find interesting and what you don't. So in my case, I mentioned that my field is evolutionary and population genetics. But I wasn't born knowing that that was what I wanted to do. I didn't figure that out until probably, about this time, like about where you're at right now, to be honest. Actually, part of what helped me figure that out was doing exactly this, looking at what kinds of research were actually going on in different labs. So, I'd had a strong interest in genetics all along. I'd had some seemingly kind of separate interest in ecology and evolution. But I found, when I started looking at genetics labs, genetics programs, I actually found, and it feels a little awkward to say this, I actually found a lot of the research didn't really interest me. It was actually for my own, mental disposition, it was too kind of narrow and specific for me. And that helped me realize something about what I didn't want to do. And then, when I found, some labs that were, more aligned with what I still do, I realized that that really captured my interest a lot more. And so, this could be a really, helpful way to kind of check what you think you're interested in based on like coursework, versus, what's actually out there and being done. So I think, however you decide to do this, combination of these approaches and other things. And the other thing I put here is just, talk to people. You are in a great place to learn about all different areas of biological research. And so, I'm kind of forcing you to talk to at least one person. That is the next thing that's due basically, is to at least schedule a meeting with a faculty member here, or failing that, someone in their group who's been in this field for multiple years. They will have a great perspective on, what are some really interesting and strategic research areas to consider right now related to your current set of interests. And again, it's fine if that shifts through time, but the more you explore, the more likely you are to get somewhere that will keep you motivated on a long-term research project. My other bit of advice is, in terms of what you want to research in grad school, part of it is just what keeps you intellectually curious and that aspect of motivation. But another part of it could be, is there something more applied, that you'd like your research to contribute towards? And, this is kind of an individual thing. Actually, in my case, that's mostly not true. I'm very much a basic scientist, and I've appreciated just, helping in small ways to build up our basic scientific understanding of natural populations. But, for many people, this might be contributing to understanding of some disease, either directly or indirectly, just through understanding relevant molecular processes or physiological processes. Or for others, it could be, doing work that ultimately could improve agricultural food production. For others, it could be doing work that is conservation relevant. There's lots of different potential applications, and it's worth thinking in a very broad, almost philosophical sense, just about what is really important to you, and let that help to guide both your career interests and the areas that you choose to pursue for your PhD research and beyond. And so this just goes along with that. So, just considering, what might contribute toward the goals that are really important to you. And then I just thought I would ask, because some of you already have, some pretty good idea of what you want to study. And, maybe that's come from a class, or maybe it's come from working in a particular lab. But I'm just curious if anyone else, has an experience that they don't mind sharing, just about like what have you found helpful in trying to narrow down what you might like to research as a PhD student. Yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. Mm-hmm. Oh. You don't, or is like constantly involved in flame wars on Twitter. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually completely ignored the whole Twitter thing. And that's still true. Like one time I got around to like making a lab account. I never used it. But this summer, I noticed at a conference a colleague mentioning a server for Mastodon that they were involved in helping set up. And so, yeah, actually, it seems like that's kind of where science Twitter is moving, as far as I can tell. So yeah, I at least, I have an account there. I haven't posted anything yet. I will soon, really. But that's interesting to hear. Yeah. Anyone else? I thought I saw another hand. Uh-huh. Yeah, that is a great opportunity. If you have a chance to go to a conference, then you can really see firsthand what is being done, looking at the posters, going to talks, talking to people. That is a great opportunity if you have it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, I thought it was great, but when I started working in the lab, everything was very interesting, but it hadn't completed me before I learned how to field experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like we in the Amazon area, what it was, like connecting those two things, and that's what really drove me to that field.
Yeah.
So the university does offer a lot of internships with those things, trying as many things as you can.
Uh-huh. So for you, managing to have this kind of experience that gave extra context to what you were already working on in the lab. Yeah, that's really neat. Uh-huh.
On the more personal side, I know a lot of my life had different like affective disorders, and myself have anxiety that's impacted my life and educational experience in certain ways. So I was curious about why that is and wanted to learn more about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's often, a really strong personal motivation, behind the goals that people come into graduate school with. And we'll come back to that, I think, too, when we talk about like the statement of purpose, because some people, and this can work very well. Some people decide to make their statement of purpose very personal in that way and talk about really what's motivated them to get into this field. And that can work very well. It's not a necessity for a personal statement, but it does remind me of that, because, what you're telling me, it kind of echoes, like what I've often read, from people applying for PhD programs. But, that's absolutely the case that, whether it's the disorders you mentioned, or, losing a loved one to cancer, or, whatever, especially, like for, research that might ultimately have some sort of medical application, there often is, a strong personal motivation like that. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's a really good, set of perspectives to add to what I had thought of here. And so, this is just a set of ideas to kind of help in that process, because I know that, quite understandably, you're at all different stages right now of trying to figure out what you might like to study. One question that sometimes comes up, is like, how important is the research I'm doing now for what I might be able to do in graduate school? So like, if I'm doing this, but I realized I'm really interested in doing that, is that going to be an option, or are they going to say, oh, your background isn't so relevant here? And overall, I would say, it is likely to be an option. So, often enough, I do find that, that students kind of imprint on the first research project that they end up doing. And, a lot of students decide they like that, or, they went into that lab for a very good reason, because it really is what they want to do. So, it's fairly common to see applications from students who want to continue doing something a fair bit like what they've done as an undergraduate. And there are some, at least modest advantages of doing that. You might have already built up a little bit of extra subject knowledge, or obtained certain research skills that are useful in that particular area. But I want to emphasize that this is not a major determinant of success as a PhD student. That, what you ultimately will have to learn and do as a PhD student, it's probably not going to make an enormous difference, what you've done as an undergraduate, or what you've learned as an undergraduate. So, that's a small practical advantage, but it's not necessarily a game changer. And more generally, I would say that, changing biological subfields between, what you've studied or researched as an undergraduate and what you want to do as a PhD student, that's quite common, and it is not a problem. So, like we have, at this university, we have somewhat specific PhD programs within biology, like genetics. But, all the time we get applications from students who have focused on slightly different areas as an undergraduate. Maybe they studied microbiology. Maybe they studied ecology. Maybe they studied biochemistry. And that's generally fine. Like if they've done biological research, obviously, like, if what they want to do is research like in a molecular lab, yeah, it is an advantage to have done something in a molecular lab. But it doesn't have to be genetics research exactly. So more than anything, though, like if it's clear that they've had a successful research experience and that they're expressing clearly, why they want to study, a particular area of genetics as a PhD student, that'll tend to work out just fine. So I would definitely, encourage you to not limit yourself, at least, based on what you've done thus far. And sometimes, the changes that we see people proposing are not even like between fields, but even just between subfields. And so, I remember, an application that I saw from the lab of a colleague who I knew because they were in my kind of subfield of evolutionary genetics. But this student, had decided they wanted to do research in a different area of genetics, something more kind of biomedically oriented. And I actually thought that was a great thing. I respected that this student, was able to kind of independently assess, what they would really like to do compared with what they were doing now. So, I saw that as a positive versus, just continuing on with whatever they had been doing. It's definitely okay to shift between different research topics as you go toward your PhD. So I'm going to pause and just check if there are any questions right now before I go into the whole kind of second part of today's class about post-PhD careers. Yes. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think I will probably come back to that in the class on choosing a program. I think it's a relevant question because some universities have these kind of gigantic graduate programs that cover much or all of biology. So it's just kind of like one entry point. And other universities like this one do not, and they instead have like a genetics PhD program, a molecular and cellular biology PhD program, a microbiology PhD program, a biochemistry PhD program, and on and on. And so there are different, I think, there are different strengths and weaknesses to each of those models. And I think, I can understand that for students who are kind of having trouble narrowing down what they'd like to do, or whose interests really straddle disciplinary boundaries, the umbrella programs might be, especially appealing. But you have to keep in mind, like you're still going to have to identify, even if you're doing a rotation program, you're still going to have to identify 3 specific labs by the time you get there, basically. So you can't really postpone, this whole process of narrowing down what you want to do. And so in some cases, having that sort of breadth all in one program might be helpful in terms of a broad spectrum of interactions that might encourage. In other cases, students might really appreciate having like, let's say a genetics focused intellectual community and being part of a cohort of students who share, that interest, and having a curriculum that is designed around that, which wouldn't necessarily be the case in an umbrella program. So, there's different things to consider about each of them. And there's like, entering with a class of 100 versus entering with a class of 12. So there's different things that might be good about each of those options. But yeah, let's come back to that too, in terms of the choosing a program part. But yeah, that's relevant here too. Okay, well, I will continue on here. And so I thought, even though this can be kind of field specific, I thought it might help to kind of map out some of the general career directions that I see PhD students ultimately pursue. So the first and most obvious to me are faculty positions, which can be either relatively more research focused or relatively more teaching focused. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm going to step through each of these in turn. So don't feel like it's all just flying by. Or one can be a research scientist either in an academic lab or in the private sector. There are also scientific jobs in government. And then some people who do research PhDs ultimately end up going into more administrative positions, like overseeing scientific programs, either at a university or maybe a funding agency. And some end up shifting gears a little bit and going in more of a writing direction with their career. So I'll say a little bit more about each of these directions in turn. So in terms of faculty positions, I mentioned this sort of spectrum between, like how much of your time is spent on research. And by research here, I guess I really mean like managing a research group more so than actually doing research versus teaching. And, I would say like, in terms of this spectrum, like, all one to all the other, there's really like, there's no place along this spectrum that is a better job than any other place along this spectrum. It really is an individual thing, based on one's own talents and one's own priorities. But faculty positions or in some cases, research group leader positions really span this whole spectrum from something that might be all research. So like if you're a research group leader, and not at a university, but maybe at some other type of research institute. Here I'm not yet talking about like the business world, but I'm talking about like some type of nonprofit research institute. It might be associated with some kind of foundation. It might be associated, even with a branch of the government, like the NIH or the USDA. So that is like the all research side of the spectrum. And then you've got kind of like the mostly research, side of the spectrum. So in general, faculty at universities like this one would fall somewhere around here. Like my contract, if you read it, the one that I signed when I first got to UW, says that my position is 70% research and 30% teaching. I think, that is kind of reflective. Like I spend the greatest part of my time like meeting with my lab members and doing other research related things. It's very much mentorship in many cases, but it's mainly in the context of leading my research group. And obviously I'm here, I teach as well. I'm teaching another class this semester, at least part of this semester as well. So I do teaching as well, but that isn't the majority of my time. There are faculty positions that might be more kind of right in the middle. And from talking with people, I feel like often, universities that have master's and even PhD students, but maybe not a great number of them, might kind of fall around this 50-50 line. There's something called the Carnegie classification of universities that is what refers to some universities as R1. Those are like the most research intensive. And then, then the next research heavy are the R2s. So I think that these might be about somewhere in the middle. There's only one R2 in Wisconsin, and that's Marquette. So that's why I used it as an example here. But then if you want to tilt things more toward teaching, but still have a little bit of research, you could become a professor at an undergraduate focused university. And that could be a liberal arts college, or it could be, like one of the many UW campuses that are not UW-Madison or UW-Milwaukee. I think any of the rest would fall in this category, where, they do hope that many of the faculty there can give their undergraduates some research experiences, but it's not as large a fraction of what they do as teaching is. And then there are, of course, faculty positions that are completely teaching focused. And that may be true at some of these same institutions, but it's actually true even for some positions right here at UW-Madison. For example, UW Genetics, my own department, has a total of 4 teaching faculty members. And so they teach classes. And in large part, that's it. You know, they might or might not do some student advising. You know, they might do some other kind of undergraduate curriculum development things, but teaching is their focus. And so, you know, this kind of represents a whole spectrum, you know, and various points in between. So focusing first on relatively research-focused faculty positions. First of all, I want to acknowledge that if you go and do a PhD, then that means you're going to work with someone like me. It means you're going to work with someone who probably has a research-focused faculty position. And I think, you know, that tends to lead to an academic culture that kind of, you know, elevates this sort of position and encourages, you know, either implicitly or explicitly pursuing this type of position. But I realize that even though I really like my job, it is not the right job for everyone. You know, so what we need is not necessarily to try to encourage every PhD student to pursue my job. That's completely impractical, for one thing. There aren't enough jobs like this. You know, we need to encourage students to, you know, to focus on pursuing the careers that make the most sense for them. So why is my job not for everyone? Well, I'll talk a little bit more in the next slide about you know, different pros and cons of having a job like this one. One thing I want to emphasize, which I don't feel like is either a pro or a con, is just that my job requires a lot of multitasking. And so, you know, for some people, you know, this is actually a good thing. And for others, it's not. So, you know, I have to manage a research group with 7 full-time people in it, plus several undergraduates. I need to write grant proposals to keep my lab funded. I need to teach, you know, in a few different classes. I need to serve on various communities within and beyond my department. And, you know, and that's just the beginning. So there's a lot of different things to keep track of. And, you know, a lot to decide on in terms of how I should be spending my time. And so, you know, individuals vary both in terms of just how natural they find it to flip back and forth between diverse activities, and also just, you know, to the extent to which they enjoy that. For me, I actually like that. And, you know, one early signal to me was that when I was a graduate student, you know, I was in that kind of early on phase where I was not only doing research, but I was taking classes and being a TA at the same time. I actually like that. I like that, you know, kind of diversity of mental stimuli. But a lot of people, including people who make very good researchers, do not like that. And so it's an important thing to, you know, observe and reflect on about yourself. Is just, you know, whether that describes you or not. So there are definitely some great things about having a job like mine. You know, I feel like I'm able to contribute to, you know, a lot of cool research happening and make an impact on basic biology. You know, I appreciate the chance to mentor future scientists at all different career stages. And I appreciate, you know, having the freedom that I do in terms of what to research. And of course, at least once you get to the point of tenure in this sort of position, then you have excellent job security compared to, you know, other potential careers in general. So those are all important advantages of this sort of position. There are disadvantages, though, that I think are important to consider. One is this: the academic career track is long and uncertain. I'll spell that out for you in just a moment. And relatedly, it is challenging to get the sort of position that I have. I have to admit that. I've seen I've seen the job searches and how many people apply. And so, I think it lends itself toward, the people who end up in these positions being people who are really willing to put a lot extra in, who tend to love what they do and are, willing to make their job more than just a 9-to-5 proposition. And so, that's important to consider, like in terms of what balance between work and non-work things do you want in the long run. In terms of, what I'm talking about with regard to what I'm calling the academic career track here, and I'm going to focus still primarily right now about research-focused faculty positions, because this is kind of like the canonical academic career track. So, okay. Right now, let's say you're a senior undergraduate and maybe you start grad school next year, or maybe you wait a few years. So let's say you're starting grad school in your early to mid 20s. Well, a PhD, takes 5 or 6 years. So, by the time you finish, you're between your late 20s and early 30s. And after that, if you want a job like mine, you have to do some postdoctoral research. I didn't even realize this before I started grad school. And then I was around postdocs, and then I saw seminars by job candidates at the university where I was studying. And I realized, oh, these people got their PhDs like 5 or 6 years ago. Huh, okay, I didn't know it was such a long road. But yeah, and it was for me too. But what that means is that by the time, you're finishing your postdoctoral research, you're probably somewhere between your early 30s and your late 30s. And then hopefully you get the faculty position you're looking for. This is probably the big uncertain step on this whole career track. Yeah, you have to get into grad school, and you're understandably focused on that right now. If you get your PhD and you do reasonably well there, I think you can get a postdoc. Speaking as someone who, sometimes looks for postdocs, I think at least the way things are right now, finding a postdoc is not the hardest thing in the world. But getting the job you want after your postdoc is less of a sure thing, I would have to admit. This is, and having this kind of uncertain point this late in the career track, I think does drive some people off for sure. Like at the end of your PhD thinking, okay, I might have to do, 5+ years of postdoctoral research. And even then, I don't really know if I'll get the job that I want. Do I really want to do that? Or do I want to take a different road? And that naturally inspires a range of different decisions. Some people feel like, hey, this is really what I want, and I'm going to bet on myself. And some people, don't want that uncertainty and realize, I'm not sure that I really, really want this as opposed to a different type of scientific career. So I might consider something else instead. And then, after you get, hopefully, the faculty position you're looking for, it's another 6 years before you would be granted tenure. Now, I would say that, statistically, this is actually a pretty high probability endeavor. Most pre-tenure faculty succeed. Not all of them, but most by far. A large majority of pre-tenure faculty succeed in getting tenure and become tenured faculty. It's worth noting, though, that by that point, you are probably somewhere between your late 30s and mid 40s. And so one question that often people grapple with in terms of this whole career track, and the fact that you're trying to really build up your scientific track record up to this point of trying to get that faculty position, one point that people often grapple with is like, if I want to have a family, when should I start a family? When along this whole, academic career track is a good time to do that? And I don't know that there is a perfect answer. And, some people find that challenging to reconcile. I mean, I think I know people who have made every possible choice along this whole spectrum in that regard. And of course, it's not a consideration for everyone. Some people know that they don't want to have kids. Some people, like me, are just not that focused on it early on and, figure they'll decide later. So, for that reason, I'm 45 and my son turned 5 yesterday. So, sometimes that's how it goes. I didn't end up having a kid until I had tenure, but that wasn't really out of, insecurity. It just is how things went for me. Other people might have kids during grad school. My first graduate student did have 2 kids while he was studying with me. Some others might have kids while they're a postdoc, or even while they're a pre-tenure faculty member. Many universities like this one will extend the tenure clock of a faculty member by a year for each child that is born during the pre-tenure period. And so then, 6 years becomes 7 or 8 or whatever, in terms of the time you have to assemble the tenure packet that the university wants to see. I didn't want to spend a ton of time talking about that because I know it's not equally relevant to every person. But, just that it is often something that people think about, in terms of this whole career track. And obviously it depends on a lot of things, individual priorities and, of course, when one actually meets the partner that they might like to start a family with. It's something that is a consideration. I think a lot of people in academia are thinking about, like, how can academia become more friendly to people who want to start families, and realizing also that this is often a barrier toward achieving greater gender parity at the level of scientific faculty. And this even still might tend to dissuade women more frequently than men, because it's the case today that, like, incoming graduate students, at least in fields that I'm familiar with, we have at least as many incoming women as men. And I think we probably graduate at least as many female PhDs as male. I'm a little less sure in terms of, like, new faculty. It seems like there are a decent fraction of women. Certainly by the time you get to senior faculty, it's very skewed toward males still. And that might partly still reflect historical phenomena, given that, professors may remain on the faculty for, 30 years or more in some cases. But, it's just a topic that can be worth considering. All right, next I'm going to focus on teaching-oriented faculty positions. So in these sorts of positions, you might be expected to teach a few classes per semester, whereas, actually the expectation on me on a minimal level, I'm maybe a little above this, but the minimal expectation on me is to teach like 3 credits per year. Because I'm supposed to be putting most of my energy into my research program. So here I'm talking about a few classes per semester, and maybe, maybe they're still hoping that you can have a small research program where undergraduates can get some experience doing research of some kind. There's probably not a big expectation that you're bringing in any sort of grants from outside sources. If you do, that's probably just a bonus. But you're potentially in this case having a very high impact through the amount of teaching that you're doing. You're reaching a lot of students by teaching that many classes. But I would have to say that at least, to go after tenured, faculty positions that are teaching focused, I think is still very competitive. I think often people end up having to do multiple different teaching experiences before they're competitive for that sort of position. So they might do something like that's sometimes called like a visiting professor position. So in other words, this university needs someone to teach this class this semester, or these 3 classes this semester, but there's no promise of any further employment beyond that. So you might have to do a few things like that in different places potentially before getting a position like this one. In general, though, from talking to people, I think it is, and this is, I don't think this is just me, like saying, oh, I work so much harder than other people. I have the sense that, that these sorts of positions might be a little less consuming than the sort of job that I have. So, for example, one time, before I was a faculty member, I don't remember if I was a grad student or postdoc, I went to some sort of career workshop at a conference, and there was both there was a research focused faculty member. I think he might have been from the University of Georgia, and then there was a relatively more teaching focused faculty member. I think he might have been from I don't know, Georgia Southern or something like that. And the guy from Georgia Southern, said, well, one way you can look at the differences between our positions is that my colleague from UGA, last night he went back to his hotel room to work on a grant proposal, and I went out to the bar to socialize with my friends. So, that was the point that he was trying to make anyway. Having this type of position is that, I think he felt it was a little bit less intrusive toward, out of work hours. That's all I have to say in terms of teaching focused faculty positions. The next one I was going to talk about is being a full-time researcher in something like a university lab. And this, could potentially be done either with or without a postdoc, so with or without doing postdoctoral research. And so, this is a way that you can continue doing scientific research that contributes toward public knowledge of biology. Now, compared to being, the research group leader, of course, you don't quite have as much say in terms of what directions you might pursue in the lab. So, that could be a drawback. But, on the other hand, this would typically be, more like a 9-to-5 job where, you have more kind of typical work-life balance. And you could compare that. So this is the slide that was supposed to go after that one. So this in some cases can be a very long-term job. Sometimes research scientists work for 10 or 20 years in the same lab, but that's not automatic. And there's not necessarily a guarantee of job security. There might be certain policies relevant to hiring and firing of this sort of position, but ultimately your continued employment depends on whether the lab you're in continues to get grants that can pay your salary. There's no other source that you could be paid from in general. So, that's another consideration there. Another way to become a full-time researcher is to do that in the private sector. So go work for a biotech company or something like that. And here too, people end up doing that either, with or without doing postdoctoral research first. And as you know, whereas for the academic one, I highlighted contributing to kind of, publicly available scientific knowledge. Here I'm highlighting contributing to real world scientific applications. So that's kind of one side of this coin, but the other side is that the directions that you could pursue in private sector research are constrained by, what might be potentially profitable. So on one hand, you have to do things that would potentially make money for the company, but that may seem rather constraining, and for some it might seem like a negative. But on the other hand, that also means that these would be things that have some real world significance in some context. This, is also often more of a 9-to-5 job, from what I gather. This can also be a long-term, direction, and there can be room for advancement within a company for sure. But, it is, I think sometimes, PhD students kind of look at the academic track and think, oh, that seems uncertain. I'm just going to get a job in industry. That may seem like more of a sure thing in the short run, but I've also heard from plenty of people who have lost their jobs in industry because the company had to cut half of its workforce, or it just changed its mind about what research directions were most strategic. So it's at their discretion, who they continue to employ and for how long. So there's not necessarily a long-term guarantee of job security there. Then the next category that I'm going to highlight is jobs with government, and these can really vary depending on what sort of field you're in. You could be working in a government clinical lab. You could be working, in some sort of conservation-oriented position. It varies considerably. Some positions might require postdoctoral training, others not. Some positions might interface with and even perhaps help to shape specific aspects of government policy. That's all I had on this category. I have also noticed that some PhD graduates end up going into research administration, and that can be at a university like this one. They might oversee some sort of research-related program. And that might even include programs that are helping to train students who want to become future scientists. There are also research administration positions available at funding agencies, including in the government at places like NIH and NSF. Depending on what you want to go into, a research PhD might or might not be a good or the best way to get there. I think there are also more targeted programs out there that try to prepare people for research administration. And that might be a more direct path to this sort of job. But nevertheless, certainly a decent number of people end up going from a research PhD into positions of this type. So I don't know that it's a bad way to get there necessarily. The last thing I was going to talk about is careers in science writing or publishing. So for example, some scientific journals have professional writers, so that they might write articles that summarize recent scientific studies, or they might employ professional journal editors who are trying to help determine the content of their journal, including even evaluating the potential articles that are sent to that journal. At other journals, this is done by active scientists instead, who have jobs like mine. So it varies. And then there are also more broadly, other positions in science journalism. But I would say, and it's often not clear, like if what you wanted from the beginning was a career in science writing, I don't know if I'd really recommend doing a research PhD. You could, and there, you do have to do a lot of writing to to get to a PhD. You know, research writing in particular. But on the other hand, you know, there are probably more obvious ways to get to this sort of career if you knew now that's what you want to do. You know, like, you know, I had one student who began working with me as a graduate student and then pretty quickly realized that, you know, they weren't really that into research. And they basically transferred to UW's Master's in Life Science Communication program, and that seemed like a much better fit. You know, so I mean, that had been an interest of theirs all along, but they realized that that was really what they wanted to focus on. So, you know, might as well focus on that. All right. Any questions so far about the different post-PhD careers that I've highlighted? Yes. Mhm. Sorry, I missed the very beginning of what you said.
For each of these careers,
Mhm.
there is a specific type of PhD program you should look for, or other like more criteria while looking for PhD.
That's a good question. You know, I guess I've been imagining these as different tracks that, you know, actually different students in the same research-focused biology PhD program might pursue. You know, I guess here I was kind of hinting that there might be other programs that might be a more direct route to this sort of career, and to a lesser extent for research administration. Otherwise, at most, maybe like, you know, if you have a strong interest in teaching, I think, you know, you might want to make sure that, you know, your PhD program offers you good opportunities to do teaching during, but, you know, depending on the type of position you want to get, you know, it might still make sense to pursue a research PhD. You know, it might seem peculiar, but like, you know, the 4 teaching faculty that I mentioned in my own department, I'm pretty sure they all have research PhDs in biology. So you might think, well, why would that need to be the case? Maybe it doesn't need to be the case. I don't know, but I think it is often the case. Anything else? All right. Well, in you know, getting toward the end of this topic today, I want to again highlight that if you're not sure yet exactly what you want to study or what you want as a career, that is quite normal at this stage. It is, you know, naturally very difficult. I'd say increasingly difficult to figure out what you might like to study as a PhD student. You know, if you imagine the realm of human knowledge as like, you know, one giant sphere, and it's, you know, it's always increasing as we learn more things, but that means, you know, there's kind of a greater and greater surface area around the outside of that sphere, which means there's all the more for you to choose amongst in terms of where you'd like to contribute to human knowledge. There's a lot more out there today, you know, than there was 20 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever. So, you know, it's a challenge, and it's only getting more challenging, I would say. And one thing I want to emphasize, though, is that, you know, if you continue to find that this is really a barrier for you, you know, one thing that might suggest is that it isn't time yet to apply for a PhD program. And, you know, one thing we'll talk about more next time is, you know, just that you have options. And, you know, it is far from being the case that you need to go right on to a PhD program if you're going to do it. And, you know, I mentioned last time, and I'll mention again next time, that most of our incoming PhD students and the program that I work with are not coming directly from their undergraduate degree. Most of them have done something else in between, and we'll talk more next time about what they've done. And I'm even giving them a little survey now about, you know, how happy they are with, their chosen timing of starting their PhD study. And I'm hoping to share some results with you about. And after that, I think the week after that, you'll get a chance to hear from some of our students directly. We'll have a little panel discussion with them. So anyway, I just wanted to, to hint right now, just that for a lot of people who eventually do graduate school, the experiences that they have after graduating end up being instrumental in terms of figuring out what they would like to do as a PhD student. But at the same time, it is also totally normal for interests and especially career plans to shift during PhD study. But, the more that you can reflect on that now, I think the better position you'll be in. So that's all I've got for today. I'm ending more than 5 minutes early today. There was this little assignment that is due for next time. I'm just going to post some little Canvas mechanism for you to report, on the meeting that you've set up. I haven't done that yet, but I will shortly. Again, all you need to have done by next Friday is to have scheduled this. That's why I've been encouraging you, even before today, to be contacting faculty about setting up this meeting. It's not always easy to schedule things with faculty, as many of you have probably noticed. If you haven't written to anybody yet, do that today. Seriously. Because again, the expectation here is that by a week from now, you have heard back from a faculty member and coordinated with them, and that you have set up a time to talk with them. It can be in person, it can be by Zoom or whatever medium you prefer, but just that you've set something up. All right, I will hang around if there are any questions. And since that is the office hours of the class, and otherwise, I will see you next time.